Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So obviously there's been a number of patches that have been released to date, and the most recent of which we'll cover off on very shortly, which will be hopefully coming out in the next few weeks, and we'll address loot finally. And there was a post that was put up by GGG last night. But I wanted to sort of talk about a few of the touch points that people have been raising as concerns for the game up to this point. Now, personally, I don't have any negatives about Last Epoch. I think it's a really good game. I just don't feel like playing Last Epoch because I find it a bit odd and it's not my type of ARPG as it is as a main ARPG to play. But from what I've seen from a number of other creators and a number of people within the community, there seems to be this like really negative approach to Path of Exile 2 using using Last Epoch as a bit of a slight against Path of Exile 2 at the moment. And there's a few concerns that sort of come to mind about that. Now, the thing that I'll sort of talk about very firstly as a bit of a riff, and this video is going to be a little bit of an unstructured riff, but talk about a few things. Now, obviously, some of the concerns that I raised earlier when the game first came out were exactly that about endgame, were about the whole like Souls-like argument that people had for a very long time, which clearly that was not the direction the game needed to go in. And the people that were playing the game at that point in time are no longer playing the game, so the majority of the market remaining in Path of Exile 2 is the Path of Exile player base, from what I can surmise, with the exception of a large number of players that did sort of come in, but you know, that's neither here nor there. Really, the most vocal part of the community is the Path of Exile community at this stage, which, you know, ultimately have been following the game for the longest amount of time. And this is sort of what I like to call the honeymoon period. So it was interesting to watch the interview between, I think, Khan and Jonathan last week, or earlier this week. I think it was last week, actually, possibly, maybe earlier this week. Because he actually made a really interesting comment, and it's around hearing the appropriate feedback. And the comment was that in the 0.1 patch, that basically the most vocal people were the ones telling others to get good and the game was fine. And basically the feedback that came from creators and others that was saying the game is not very fun, it's not in a good state, that was being washed out by the overwhelming amount of positivity for the game on the initial release, because, you know, it was that initial burst of new players coming into the game going, this is great, yada, yada, yada. Now, what's really interesting is a number of months later, 4 to 5 months later to be precise, we sort of get to the point where, oh, that feedback really was the wrong feedback. Now, is this GGG's fault? You know, there's a number of things that they did not very well in this process of deving this game through to QA testing and stuff like that. Essentially, that's what this early access is. And, you know, I don't think that's the best defense, but it is a defense that you could use. But as with, for example, you know, if you were working for a business or a manager or something like that, without being able to be provided the appropriate feedback in the first place, are we really surprised that Dawn of the Hunt sort of came out in the state that it did? Now, obviously, builds were going to get nerfed. That was an inevitability for anyone who's played Path of Exile. Things change, right? Builds get obliterated, skills get rebalanced. I could tell you 1,000 different things that have changed in the last 12 years in Path of Exile 1 that have upset the community, and I've followed it all the way through. So it's not surprising that things were going to change in the patch notes, which is why initially I was pretty happy with the patch notes, because to be honest with you, there is actually quite an amount of build variety. In particular, that's coming from a lot of the new items that were added to the game, the new uniques. We've got Thorn builds now. There's a Beerus build that's going around. I'm going to do a curation of these builds in the next evening, basically going through some of the really interesting builds that are out there. Unfortunately, the most common ones that we tend to see are what the big creators are putting out there. And they're actually not the most played, well, they're probably the most played because they are meta, right? That group creates the meta. However, there's a large number of other builds coming from very small creators and mid-sized creators that are actually really interesting and cool and take advantage of some really dope mechanics. And we're not really seeing that stuff heavily publicized out there. We're not seeing that stuff make its way in. And then obviously the creator community is now basically almost turncoated on GGG and is throwing them under the bus. And I think that's not an appropriate approach to take. I think that there are big problems in Path of Exile 2 right now. There's no question of a doubt that the game is in not a fantastic state. However, looking at this from a glass half full perspective, GGG are taking on board the feedback. In particular, the Zisserin interview was a fantastic interview, by the way. And that actually pointed out a lot of issues that the community were up in arms about, and GGG finally listened. The problem is that when people start throwing tantrums online and posting themselves in videos and, acting basically like children, it's very hard if you're a company that is trying to, at the end of the day, what is GGG's purpose? It is to make profit, to make revenue, which leads to profit, right? But if you're taking feedback from people who don't conduct themselves with the minimum level of decorum and throw tantrums and wobblies all the time, you're putting a lot of people's faith in that feedback. And if that's the wrong feedback, things are going to go really bad and go south really quickly. So, are you necessarily going to listen to people who behave like that, or are you going to listen to people who are more adult in the approach that they're taking to providing the feedback? If I was in GGG's standpoint, I would be listening to the cogent feedback that is reasonable and just, and not just people jumping up and down, left, right, and center. Now, obviously, the other thing that's happened is player numbers have dropped off initially. Player numbers are still pretty strong. They're about 100, 120,000 a day. In fact, on the launch of Last Epoch, we can compare the two, and they're pretty comparable, right? Last Epoch didn't launch to as big numbers as it initially did when it got to like 200 and something thousand. That being said, still a respectable launch, but it's about the same as Path of Exile 1 League, right? So it's not that crazy. It's not like exceptionally crazy, but it is good to see. It's a game that deserves a lot of credit. It's a fantastic game. It's creative, and it's got a lot of really fun mechanics. That being said, I just don't feel like the approach that's been taken by a number of people in the community that figurehead it right now is the appropriate approach to take around essentially blasting the devs and, and basically corralling up an angry mob against GGG. I think that's the wrong approach. Now, and this is coming from me, who has been critical about project management from GGG, who's been critical about the actual delivery from GGG around Path of Exile 2. I was initially quite disappointed with the game as well on that first launch right before December. Obviously, the big fault from GGG is its cardinal rule in IT delivery: never put a product out there right as you're going on the Christmas leave break. That's a big no, you don't do that. And they did that, and they did acknowledge that that was a mistake. That shouldn't have happened. Really, like, Path of Exile 2 needed a lot more time to cook. Now, talking through a few of the problems, yep, the endgame system's pretty lackluster right now, but it's in early access and there's a lot of content that still needs to come out. We haven't even got half the classes in the game yet, so, or at least like we've got a number of the classes, but there's still a number to come. So we haven't really seen very much of the game as it is in this standpoint. And this is me justifying Path of Exile 2 right now, looking at it critically. Now, in the initial release of the 0.2 patch, leveling was really bad. It was grueling. Now, I did start a character today, and I felt like a god going through and killing Geonor and whatnot with the warrior of all classes. So I sort of feel like they've really made strides to really fix that. It actually feels pretty good. The bosses within the campaign acts are still pretty bad, right? There's no sugarcoating that. Jamanra and whatnot is a really, really badly designed fight. Neither here nor there. For the most, the campaign's pretty playable. It's pretty quick to get through the campaign now. Feels good. You power up as you go. Starting to feel more like how I play Path of Exile 1, and while people don't like that comparison, it's Path of Exile game. Get over it. There are still quite a number of skills that are really undertuned. I did notice this with like my explosive spear skill. I would have expected there to be more meat on the bone. And like I've gotten that up to POB Theorycraft of like 500,000 DPS, right? So with the Chernoborg, and Chernoborgs, unfortunately, they're really expensive. But things like the Deepest Tower and stuff like that are really cool mechanics. And I really like unique design like that too. Now, that's not to say there's still a large number of builds that are working from the last league and, the last patch, and will continue to work. There's still tons of people playing Monk, there's tons of people playing Lightning Arrow, there's tons of all that. Obviously, the new flavor of the month is the Amazon, and to be honest with you, when the Druid comes out, then that'll be the most played class. When the Marauder comes out, that'll be the most played class, so on and so on. That's just the psychology of it, right? It's new and fangled, everybody wants to try it, and then everybody wants to see if there's some breaks in the stuff that's there. Old stuff will get nerfed, it will get rebalanced. To be honest with you though, like, I'm not negative to the endgame pacing. I don't necessarily think it's boring. I don't think it's any different than what we do in Path of Exile 1. It's just a little bit slower. The problem is that people that are calibrated to like one button tap entire maps and blast and nuke maps are basically complaining, and that's just not what Path of Exile 2 is. I sort of like the slower play, and to be honest with you, for people who do like delve like me, I sort of like the end game mapping system because it's very, very similar to Delve. It just feels like Delve. It's great. Like it just feels like I'm at home and that. And there are currency strats that you can currently do. They're not that great. But, you know, Citadel farming is definitely an easy way to make easy exalts. If you want to see me do a video on that, I can definitely do a video on that. But yeah, there are strategies out there. You know, I'm making a ton of bank and whatnot at the moment just playing T15 plus maps. So like, that's all you need to do. Like, people seem to be in this big rush to take down the pinnacles and whatnot. Like, all you need to do is progress your build. In the first week, I got all the way through to T15 plus the T16, T17 bosses and T18 bosses with no real issues, with a relatively like mid-tier build, and that works fine. And obviously that's on the channel. I'll put a link in the description to that build that I used. And I didn't follow a guide around. I created my own guide for all of that sort of stuff. And a lot of people are doing exactly that. They're creating their own builds. Now, what you see a lot of creators doing is just following the line and picking the most OP build they can find because they just want to nuke through the game to get to the end game. And I'd actually argue and say, think about why you're playing the game, and is that really the most fun strategy to play the game, just like cheesing the game? Or is it more fun to problem solve and make something really cool for yourself? This is like half the community will be on the side of, yeah, that's why we're playing Path of Exile 2. And the other half will be, nah, I just want to get to end game and just blast. And that's fine either way. There's nothing wrong with either of those approaches. But just be aware that that's what a lot of content creators do, because it's really boring if you're stuck in the campaign and people are watching that. You want people to, you know, be able to see the end game content. So you really want something to push you there because, you know, more views equals clicks equals money, right? That's basically how content creation works at the end of the day. That's, you know, what you tend to see. So those are some of the things that sort of come to mind after seeing what I've been seeing of recent. And I didn't want to do like a video just nailing people to the pole or anything like that. And, you know, I've been watching the, you know, the compilation channels, and there's like a ton of those channels getting around now. And obviously, like, they just pick up on the juiciest parts of what people are doing, but also, like, you know, what you see a creator doing and what you do are probably two completely different things. Like myself, I work full time. I don't have enough time to sit there and farm citadels all day long. So yeah, I'm going to have a lot less currency, and my builds are going to progress a lot less slower than somebody who's going to sit in front of the computer for 24 hours a day and just play non-stop. And that's just how it is. That's just, you know, how it works for everyone that works and whatnot, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's just how you play the pacing of the game. Now, do I think Path of Exile 2 is boring? I actually think it's enjoyable as it is right now, and it's only going to get better. Like, looking forwards, it's an early access. Last Epoch hit 1.0 like now 2 seasons ago, and I was there, and it didn't feel like a very good game initially. I had graphical issues. I had all sorts of issues, to be honest with you. And so it had a long way to go, as did Path of Exile 1. Path of Exile 1, you could barely get 6 links when it first came out, and maps were so gruelingly hard that they had to tune it all down. What we're currently seeing is Path of Exile 2 is just following in suit of Path of Exile 1. All of these things were tried in Path of Exile 1 and now are being tried in Path of Exile 2. And, you know, GGG is just seeing what works and what doesn't work, and more credit to them. Like, they got to calibrate the market and figure out how this game works and what things look like. And unfortunately, this is going to piss some people off in the process of that. That being said, overall, like, sort of just as a bit of a recap of everything that I've just said here and whatnot, I was relatively negative about Path of Exile 2, like, for the last patch. And then at the very end of the patch, I basically went, I'm going to really try and learn the game. And that's what I started to do. And now I've sort of gotten into it, and, you know, now I can beat the Trial Master and stuff like that from just practicing and learning the mechanics. And I actually find the game pretty okay. Like, it's a pretty fun game. A lot of people are still playing it. Like, I think it's like low cap was 83,000 people today. So what I'd probably say is just like, you know, just draw your own conclusions on the game. It's not in the best state right now. That's understandable. I'm pretty sure the devs know that. You know, we saw player number drop off. We saw people basically burst up about issues in the game, and GGG have been fixing it now. And they made a really good comment in the interview with Karnas and with the interview with Zisrin, is they just want to fix the game up so it becomes fun. Now, right now, it's not as fun as what it could be for a lot of players, and they're going to get it there. But I don't think going on a witch hunt against the developers from some of the stuff that I've seen is the right idea. And you can take it from me as genuine, because, you know, I've been critical about it. But there's a difference when it comes to being critical and critiquing something and being malicious, and I think and vindictive, and I think that's the real clear thing that we need to remember as a community is if we want to have a dev like GGG that does engage with the community to the capacity that it does, and it's unorthodox for that. Let's look at Blizzard, for example. They released a cookbook that was totally out of season and out of lockstep with anything reasonable. You know, and even down to what they do release and what they do to their game for Diablo 4. Like, let's be real, they're not listening to any community. They just don't care. Whereas GGG does. And what we don't want to do is deter them from wanting to engage with the community moving forwards, because community engagement is the most important part for them to make a game for everybody, so everybody can enjoy. That being said, I do think that player drop-off, negative comments, and reviews do drive improvement in the game, and that did need to happen because 0.1 was not good. And the crazy thing though is people need to also understand that because that feedback wasn't provided clearly in 0.1, we as a community actually misled GGG, and they thought the game was perfectly okay because they're relying on the community to provide that feedback at the end of the day. And without that, they then put the game out in the state of 0.2. And we shouldn't be surprised by that because we just did not provide the feedback appropriately initially. So how could they correct if they weren't being told that they were doing something wrong? Anyway, I thought I'd put this video out just to express some thoughts about it. Obviously, I'm looking at this from a productive standpoint for both the community side of things and also from, you know, providing feedback, appropriate feedback to the devs as well. I think everybody just needs to calm down a bit. And if you're not happy with the game, just don't play it at the moment. And it'll improve and it'll grow over time into something that is hopefully one of the best ARPGs that ever exists in the history of ARPGs. I'm pretty confident about that, and I'm starting to see that, and the devs are starting to cotton on, even though into an element to it, they are a little bit out of touch, but they will sort of figure things out over time as they sort of touch and go through the process of balancing the game. And this comes back to a video I put out at the very start of all this, is what Path of Exile 2 needs is balance, and currently we're working through that process. And GGG is, you know, complying or working with the community, and the community needs to, in kind, you know, take the frustration and the anger levels down a little bit and just be a little bit more workable to get the best possible end result, which is a great ARPG for everybody to enjoy. Anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to like and sub to the channel, and there'll be plenty more videos coming out in the coming days, but I will see you guys later on.